I have been moving more heavily into Python recently, and as tends to happen as you jump in with 2 feet into an ecosystem, there's a learning curve. And I want to share here with you a little bit of what my progression has been. For me, the environment that I work in, the configuration that I have, the tooling, the plugins, the editors is really important. I need to feel comfortable in it. And so I'm going to show you here where I started. I started at the command line. This is very friendly, very easy, very quick. You can do pretty much everything you want. However, pretty soon you want to be able to capture the work that you're doing. You can do that within a file, and I really appreciated the interactive shell that Python has, so where you can load a file, but at the same time inspect some of the variables. That was pretty good. But eventually, as I mentioned, I wanted to capture some of that content, and then I moved to Nano. So a little bit more than just the interactive shell, but I found it to be too plain. And so I'm going to show you here a file. And before I loaded, the plain Nano system has no syntax highlighting. And so that's one of the things I wanted to add, and I'll show you here what it looks like once I have added it. You can see here that I get syntax highlighting, which is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and exit from the editor. And if you want to do this, and periodically I'll check a file this way, you can install on Mac OS. You can install the upgraded version of Nano. The version that it ships with is pretty old. And then you can create a file at the root of your user directory, call it .nanorc, and then within it, write the following, the line that is in quotes here. If you do that, it'll reference the right location for the files that were downloaded with the upgrade of Nano, and you'll get syntax highlighting. As I started to push on its functionality, I could have used it, but I felt it was working too hard to get too little. So at that point, I moved on to Sublime Text, which is a text editor I have been using for years. Sublime is a fantastic editor. Unfortunately, a lot of the community has been moving to VS Code. I'll come back to that later. And I want to show you here the configurations that I did out of the box. I added a number of packages. I'm going to list the packages here. Anaconda, bracket highlighter, and package control, which you need to install packages, are really the core of what I added. I added a couple more, which are sidebar enhancements and terminal. Sidebar gives you more options on the sidebar. Terminal really only gives you the ability to open up a terminal in the same directory that the file you're looking at is in. It's convenient, but it really doesn't do that much. And I'll show you here some of the configurations for Anaconda. Let me go ahead and get back to the file. Anaconda has a tremendous amount of functionality. So much so that I turned off a bunch of things because otherwise it's a bit too noisy. The linting, I'll make more comments about the linting in a minute. I also set the interpreter to be Python 3 as opposed to 2. And I set this last option, which was gutter theme. That is the style with which the linting symbols are going to be within the editor. So I'm going to go ahead here and load up a file. I'm going to do that now. And as you can see there, I have a file of Python. And if I remove the space here on line 12, you'll note that I get that little warning symbol on the side. And if I go back to it and you read the status bar, it says missing white space. Now, what that convention is for the language might be too annoying for you. There's a bunch of different styles that you can configure too. I found it to be pretty forgiving, meaning just right. I also considered initially installing a much harsher linter, and I went with Sublime Linter, the great linter that exists within Sublime Text. And I tried a couple of packages. One was Pep8, which now is PyCode style, and also PyFlakes. Both of them impose way too much structure on me. It was a lot too noisy. And so I ended up disabling it. I did some of the same with the configurations of Anaconda out of the box. but I got it to pretty good spot pretty easily. The other thing that I'll mention is I removed the auto formatting, which formats your file without you having to do, trying to understand all the style configurations that you need to do, or styling that you need to do to conform to the standards that are being followed by the editor. And I wanted to have some of that pain initially. I just wanted to understand more fully what styling recommendations were within this environment. Now, this has served me really, really well. The thing that I'll mention as well is that the build system that is built into Sublime Text is really, really good. If you go to Tools and you set up your build system, you can see here that I have Python 3 by default. Out of the box, you will not have it. You'll have to add a new one. You can see you'll just have the Python 2. And so once you have that, by simply doing Command B, you can execute your code, which is pretty convenient. Now I'll show you next how to set up that build system. So in order to add the build system for Python, you would go to Tools, which is of the window. Tools, Build System, go all the way to the bottom, select New Build System. When that comes up, the file that comes up, you're going to call it Python 3, Sublime-build, as you can see there, and enter the following. Obviously, if you have a very different configuration for Python 3, you would make that configuration here in the file. But for most people, that will be the path you see here. So this turned out to be really, really great. However, I wanted to get even more functionality, so then I went to VS Code, which I'm going to show you in a minute. VS Code out of the box. Let me go ahead and remove this for a second. Does some support. However, you really get a great deal when you install the Python plugin that has been written by the VS Code team themselves. It has a great deal of functionality. You can see here how widely it is used, close to 60 million. However, I found the environment a little heavy. So that is for a quick test, sometimes, and especially as you start to have multiple files, you start to have issues with the debugger and some issues just in general when it comes to the way in which this is set up. What's more, the way that I got it to work out of the box, plus with the plugins without any issue, is to commit to a folder and a configuration every single time. So that is, every single time you're going to do a small task, you have to create a new directory, you have to set up your debugging, and I found that to be a lot of noise or a lot of friction to be able to do something quickly. Sublime was lightning. I didn't have to think about configuration environments. It just worked. Now you do get a great deal more. The functionality, the linting, the debugging, everything in general, the testing is just much better when it comes to VS Code. So for me, when it comes down to the end here, I spend most of my time in Sublime. When I'm going to do a very, very quick test, I can do it at the command line. When I'm going to do something more involved, where I know I will be making multiple files, multiple packages, then certainly going to VS Code makes sense. So I hope this is useful for somebody else who's going through this learning curve. I feel pretty good now with Sublime Text working most of the time, and for those heavier cases, then I can go to VS Code, and for the very simplest of cases, I can do the command line.